Good morning. How many people are happy to be here today? Excited to be here today? All right. How many people went home and thought about, hey, who does God say I am? Right. Cool. How many people got an answer? Cool. That's awesome. So, today kind of going in the same direction. Last week we spoke on Thomas. And remember, we spoke that Thomas kind of got a bad rap, being known as Doubting Thomas, because Thomas was one of the oldest disciples. He was one of the most faithful disciples. He was known as the father of Christianity in India, a nation with millions and millions and millions of people. And today, I want to talk about Judas. How many people know who Judas is? All right, so let's talk about Judas. Let's think about him for a second. All right, he's no different than Thomas. He's a Jew. And he has grown up his whole life hearing stories of the Messiah. He has grown up his whole life hearing how this man was going to come and he was going to kick the Romans out of power. He was going to take over and he was going to establish his kingdom here on earth, and Jews were going to rule and reign here forever. That's what they were looking for. That's what they were expecting. Right? That's his mindset that he has. Before I go too further, we're going to start off in Matthew today. Who has their Bible? There we go. We're going to be in Matthew 26. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" Him being Jesus. And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time he saw opportunity to betray him. Now on the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.' So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When evening had come, he sat down with the 12. Now as they were eating, he said, 'Assuredly I say to you, one of you will betray me.' And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and each of them began to say to him, 'Lord, is it I?' And he answered and said, 'He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it was written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born.' Then Judas, who was betraying him, answered and said, 'Rabbi, is it me?' And he said to him, 'You have said it.'" Let's go ahead and skip forward to the next one. We're still in Matthew. We're skipping forward a little bit. This is after Jesus has been arrested. This is after Jesus is being tried. It's in the middle of his trial. And it says, "And when morning came, all of the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, 'I have sinned by betraying innocent blood.' And they said, 'What is that to us? You see to it.' Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, 'It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, because they are the price of blood.' And they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day." So let's back up and let's talk about Judas. He is a Jew. He is looking for the Messiah, right? He has an idea in his head what the Messiah is. The Messiah is going to be this king, somebody who raises up in a powerful warlike faction, takes over the entire country, and rules and reigns with the children of Israel, with the Jews being in the head, in the leadership, no longer slaves. This is what he's looking for. He is in the inner 12 of the disciples. Think about that. Jesus had thousands of people follow him. He had 72 disciples, people that he looked at and said, "You're my disciples." 72. Out of the 72, he had 12. That was his inner core. Judas was part of that. We think of Judas as being the outcast of the disciples, but he was part of the inner core. Moreover, you had somebody by the name of Matthew who was accustomed to dealing with money, and yet all of the disciples trusted Judas with the money. Up until the very end, they trusted Judas with the money. Not only that, we see that at the Last Supper, when Jesus says, "One of you are going to betray me," nobody pointed to Judas. They all pointed to themselves. Nobody pointed and said, "It's going to be him." They all said, "Lord, is it me? Is it me?" They done that because nobody knew who it was going to be. They done that because Judas was part of the 12. He was part of them. He was accepted by them. He was one of the inner core. Now, past this point, some of the stuff I'm going to say is my opinion. But I want you to think about this. Judas has been with Jesus, and no less than 8 times he has seen a plot to kill Jesus fail. Everywhere they go, somebody's coming to try to kill Jesus. Everywhere they go, they're having to leave. They are actually, if you remember last week, I said the disciples didn't want to go to Jerusalem. They didn't want to go because Jesus told them, "When I go to Jerusalem, I'm going to die." The disciples didn't want to go. And Thomas stood up and said, "If he's going to die, we're going to die by his side. Stand up. We're going with him." I 100% believe that Judas believed that Jesus was the Messiah. And I 100% believe that he never thought that it was going to end up the way it did. He had seen Jesus ease out through crowds. He's seen him escape time and time and time again. And I want you to think about this. What was his betrayal? He told him where he was at. We're going to read in a minute that they already knew where he was at. Jesus told him, he says, "Look, you've seen me. You've been with me every day when I was in the temple. Why do you come at night?" We know now why they came at night, but they didn't know then. These people that were seeking to kill Jesus knew where Jesus was at 8 hours earlier and knew where Jesus was going to be 12 hours from now. Was Judas led astray? Yes, he was. The Bible says that Satan entered Judas. And we see that Judas, bad idea, bad judgment, whatever. I believe he goes and he accepts the 30 pieces of silver thinking, "Man, I just got one over on the Romans. Y'all been trying to catch this man for 3 years and you failed. And now you're going to give me $30 and we're going to get out of here." Only when they do catch him, he immediately shows remorse. He immediately goes back to him and says, "Hey, wait a minute. I've betrayed innocent blood." And they're like, "Too late." And his regret and his remorse was so much that he ended his life. We're going to change gears right there. We're going to come back to it. Because, in my opinion, I don't believe Judas was the worst betrayal that Jesus had that night. Because all Judas did was tell him, "He's in the garden." They could have asked around and found that out. They could have waited till the next day and he would have been right there with them in the temple again teaching. Let's pull up the next scripture. We're going to be in Luke this time. Luke 22. And where we're at here is, this is where Jesus is in the garden. And he brought, like I said, we had the 72. Out of the 72, we had 12. Out of the 12, he had 3. Who knows who the 3 are? No guesses? So Peter, James, and John are with him. And he's praying. And he goes, it says about a stone's throw away. So probably from here to the door, away from them. and he is praying. And he gets up and he comes back and he finds them asleep. And that's where we find ourselves here, as he's speaking to them. And while he was still speaking, behold, a multitude. And he who was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Then those around him saw what was going to happen, and they said to him, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus answered and said, permit even this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, captains of the temple, and the elders who had come to him, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you daily in the temple, did you not try to seize me? But this is your hour and the power of darkness. Having arrested him, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house. But Peter followed at a distance. Now when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. And a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, this man was also with him. But he denied him, saying, woman, I do not know him. And after a little while, another saw him and said, you also are of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. Then after about an hour had passed, another confidently affirmed, saying, surely this fellow was also with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you are saying. Immediately while he was speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly. Let's read another account of that. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, he has spoken blasphemy. Look, what further need do we have of witnesses? Look now, you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, he is deserving of death. Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who struck you? Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him, saying, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you are saying. And when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, this fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And a little later those who stood by came up and said to Peter, surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you. Then he began to curse and swear, saying, I do not know the man. Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So he went out and wept bitterly. All Judas did is said, hey, he's in the garden. All Judas did was said, hey, he's in the garden. Here, Peter is standing within sight. He's in the courtyard. So what I want you to think is that the trial is going on here, and he's right there. He's in the courtyard. He's watching it. It said that Jesus looked over and saw him and looked at him. And we see that Peter, in the midst of this, cursed him, swore he didn't know him, swore he had nothing to do with him, to the face of Jesus, because Jesus is there and can see it, and Jesus is there and can hear it.
Kind of asked, I don't know. So was that 2 of the 3 of his most closest disciples that just betrayed him right then?
It would. Both of them are about Peter right there. One comes out of Matthew, one comes out of Luke.
Okay.
And so they're both talking about Peter. And Peter, if you look from the get-go, from the start. When they're in the garden and they come to arrest him, the first thing Peter does is draw a sword. This goes against everything that Jesus has taught them from the get-go. It goes against everything to the point that Jesus stopped everything and said, Peter, put away the sword. Have you forgotten everything over the last 3 years? And he stops what he's doing, and he totally does away with everything that Peter done in healing the ear of the servant. Immediately we go to the courtyard. Jesus is being accused. There's a point where they ask Jesus, what do you say? And Jesus looks over, and I know that he looks over. When he looks over, he's looking at Peter because he can see Peter during all this. And he says, ask him what he says. Peter is silenced at that point. We don't know. It doesn't say it was Peter, but I can almost guarantee you Jesus was looking Peter in the eye at the time. Peter said nothing. The only thing Peter said that night was, I don't know him. He cursed him, he denied him, and swore that he had no clue who the man was. To me, that's a much more harsher betrayal than he's in the garden. To me. But here's the difference. And this is the point I want to make. I said all that to make this point right here. That night, both of them go to sleep. Judas, Peter, with the same thoughts. Because you will never convince me that Judas didn't 100% believe that Jesus was the Messiah. My youngest kid, Connor, he has a saying, and I agree with it. You'll have to hear me out on this. His saying is, I can't die. In 22 years of my life, I've never died. That's proof I can't die. And if you don't take in any external information from that, that's illogical thinking. It only becomes illogical when you start looking at things around you and you see other people die because of old age. But history proves that he's never died once in his life. I was watching movies the other day. How many people have ever seen Smokey and the Bandit? Okay, so it was an old movie day. It came on. I was working, had it going in the background. The bandit is getting chased all the time, right? Always has a cop behind him. How many people, when you're watching the movie, expect him to get pulled over, arrested, and thrown into jail? Why? Because time and time and time and time again, he keeps getting away from the police officers. To the point that we would be surprised if he got caught and arrested, right?
Wouldn't have been a movie if he did.
I can tell you Judas was surprised when Jesus was arrested and tried, because Judas believed he was the Messiah, the one that cannot be killed, the one that was going to establish his kingdom here on earth. And when that didn't happen, he realized, I've messed up. And he takes the money back to the priest and he says, I don't want anything to do with this, I'm sorry. And they're like, too late, we got what we want. And his regret and his remorse was so much that he ended his life. But here's the thing. When they went to sleep that evening, I can guarantee you the anxiety, the depression, the horror that came on Judas, with the voice of Satan going, you know what? You just betrayed the Messiah. Everybody in Israel hates you. You are hated. You are worse than dirt. You are the scum. What kind of friend are you? You spent the last 3 years with this guy and you just got him killed. None of the people that you've hung out with, not the 12, not the 72, are ever going to speak to you again. You are useless. But I can guarantee you that same thought was going through Peter's mind that night. How have I failed? 3 years I've walked with Jesus and I denied that I even knew him. He was my best friend for 3 years and I cursed his name. I didn't defend him. I didn't stand up for him. Same thought, I can guarantee you, is going through both Judas and Peter's mind tonight. Here's the difference. And this is the point. Listen to this. Here is the difference. They both messed up. Judas ran and got alone. And he ran away from his family, and he ran away from his friends. And he sat in silence with the voice of the enemy in his head until it drove him crazy, and he killed himself. Peter ran back to the disciples. And he spent the night with his family, and he spent the night with his friends. And he survived until the resurrection. I fully, 100% believe that if Judas wouldn't have killed himself, Jesus wouldn't have appeared to Peter first. He would have appeared to Judas. And he would have ran to Judas and figuratively would have put a coat on him, would have put a ring on him, and would have embraced him. Because there's only one unforgivable sin, right? And I can tell you that the last thing Jesus done before he died is he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. Who was the them? It was everybody. It was everybody that put him on the cross. I put him on the cross. So did you. There's no unforgivable sin. And I believe that Jesus would have forgave and did forgive Judas. Judas' problem is that he ran away. And he didn't run to his safety. He didn't run to Jesus. He ran away from Jesus. We do that ourselves. Because so many times we are Judas. And that we run back to whatever it is. A couple of weeks ago, Kim spoke about the prodigal son, and it says that he came to himself. It means that it wasn't him before then. He was deceived, he was being led astray, but he came to himself and said, hey, even the servants in my father's house live better than this. I will go back to my servant. We see that the enemy came over Judas. We also see that the enemy came over Peter. Because Jesus that night looked at Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. Right? When he's standing in the garden, he looks at the three. He looks at Peter, James, and John, and he says, you must stay awake and you must be vigilant, lest you be deceived. All of us have a time in our life that we're not awake, we're not vigilant, and we are deceived. And we end up doing something, and before we know it, we come to ourselves and we realize, I've screwed up. And now you have a choice. Do you run from God or do you run to Him? Because if you choose the path of Judas and you run away from him, it's going to destroy your life and it's going to destroy the lives of everybody around you. But you can choose the path of Peter and run back to redemption. Jesus meets Peter a few days later on the beach. And he speaks to Peter. And Peter is not Peter now. Peter is still Simon. And he says, Simon, do you love me? And he says, yes, Lord. And he asks him again, Simon, do you love me? And he says, yes, Lord. And he asks him a third time, Simon, do you love me? And Simon goes, Lord, you know all things. And to me, this is the response that I'm hearing. Good. I needed you to know that. I needed you to know that I know that you love me. You denied me 3 times. You cursed me and all this, but I need you to know that I know that you love me. And from this point on, you will not be Simon, but you will be Peter. And you're going to be the rock that I build my church upon. There is nothing you can do that throws you out of the ability to be loved by God. Is this making sense? All of us will play the part of Judas. All of us will play the part of Peter at some point in our life. We will screw up. I know I have. I've played the part several times. But it's how you react to that that will affect the rest of your life. Do you run back to Him? Or do you run away from Him? Because I can tell you the enemy wants you to run away and get alone. And the enemy wants to get you away from the people that will lift you up, that will support you, that will help you. That's his plan. That's what he wants. Don't play into that. Don't play into that. I'm going to end right there. We'll pick up again next week. But I see it too often. People come in, they give their life to Jesus, and they're like, this is the path I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to do. And then one thing leads to another, and you come to yourself and you're holding a joint. You come to yourself and you're cheating on your wife. You come to yourself and you're cheating, you're lying, you're doing something. But the key to that is you've come to yourself and you realize it. What do? Most people, a lot of people, some people choose to just run. I want you to think about Peter. When he's sitting down with Jesus on the beach and Jesus asks him, "Do you love me?" His answer is yes, but where do you think his mind went to? I didn't defend you. I cursed your name. Think about it. That's where your mind would go, wouldn't it? That's where my mind would go. Do you love me? I want to say yes, but I don't know. I see the way I acted. Do you love me? I still want to say yes, but I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. Do you love me? You know what? I don't even know. You tell me. And Jesus looks at him and says, yes, you love me. Not only do you love me, I know that you love me. And I'm going to use you to change this world. That's why it's so important to know who you are. So that when the enemy comes and throws up, hey, you've done this, you've done that, you can stand up and say, yeah, but I'm the apple of God's eye. Yes, but I'm the most beloved. Yes, but I'm a child of God. Yes, but we're all children of God. We're all loved by Him. So, everybody stand. My challenge today is this. The safest place to be is among family. The safest place to be is among people that love you. Remember that. Because the enemy doesn't want you to be among family. The enemy doesn't want you to be among people that love you. Because people that love you will do the hard thing. People that love you will look out for what's best for you. And that's the last thing the enemy wants for you. So, understand that here, you're among family. You're among people that love you. When we mess up, this is not the place to run from. It's the place to run to.
Amen.
Father, I thank you for everybody here. And Lord, I do thank you for forgiving me for my sins before I was ever even born. I thank you for leading us and guiding us. And I just ask that you would bless everybody here. Give them dreams and visions of you. Speak to them and let them know how much they are loved by you. And we bless your holy name.